For today's art project, all you need is a regular pencil and a piece of white paper.
Hi class, it's Mrs. Latinsky. I'm here at the beach in Oregon, and I thought I'd show you some of our inspiration for today's art project. We've got one right here, and here's another one, a pretty clamshell. These are 3 different kinds of clamshells. We're finding all kinds of beautiful shells on the beach, and you know, shells are great for studying art because there's so many intricate little lines and shading that we can do with a pencil. One of the famous artists who did a lot of sketching of shells, specifically shells you find on the beach that are fossils, fossilized shells of ancient kinds of sea life. Her name was Mary Anning, and actually she was the very first paleontologist, and she made sketches of the various finds she found on the beach in England where she lived back in the 1800s.
One in particular is called a Bellumnite. Basically, it's a squid-like creature from the Jurassic period, when dinosaurs were around. So they aren't just one uniform color. They have all kinds of different shades and values to show that they have a form and that they perhaps might have places where the light reflects off of them as well. Here is something super cool about these images. So Belemnites, well, they have ink inside of them, just like an octopus today might. And Mary Anning, way back in the early 1800s, she figured this out. She was able to take the ink out of these ancient fossils and use it to draw with. This very drawing we're looking at might be one of her drawings she did with Belemnite ink. Now, what might look like a normal clamshell right here is actually a fossil. In between here is not just sand, it is rock. Over the years and pressure, this clamshell has become a fossil. And Grace did some great sketches too. She even sketched what she thought the sea creatures would look like if they were alive today, which I thought that's fun. Different snail shell, and there's a clamshell. Notice how one of the things she does is she has different shades and value here. There's a darker value. You can see how much darker it is there, and lighter in different areas as well. And there's a variety of shades of value. You can see here it's a little bit lighter. In Lizzie's sketchbook drawing of our findings, for the limpet shell, she has quite a variety of different values, and she can use the value and different value shading to create that form of that shell. Okay, what do all these shells have in common? Well, they are all snail shells. Now, this one and this one are a little harder to tell because these ones are fossilized shells, snail shells from a very long time ago that have turned into rock as the pressure from the layers of earth settled upon them. But these are more modern day shells of snails I found. So first you got to think about what angle you want to draw them from. I'm going to first sketch the outline of them. They can be bigger than the actual shell because size isn't as important, but if you want to be really accurate, I suppose you could do that. And don't be worried if they're not perfect the first time you sketch them. This is sort of a rough outline as you get a sense of where all the shapes are. Like here I see there's a hole there, and there's a larger hole here. It's kind of an odd shape, so it may take a little while to get it just right. And then I know that there's this centerpiece that goes in here as well. So you just go through it and you tweak it here and there till it looks like the thing you're trying to draw. So you have to pay attention to the areas that are darker and areas that are lighter. So you're going to color harder on the areas that are darker and not so hard. And that's just a variation in the value. The value variation throughout one piece can show the areas that are darker and the areas that are lighter. So if I were to look at this, what is the darkest area on this entire thing? I think it's in here, partly because it's shaded, but partly because that's just how it is on the shell. So I'm going to press harder on this part. That's the darkest part. The next darkest part might be right here. Okay, after that, I have kind of shadow inside of here. So I'll just sort of lightly shade it here. There's going to be value all throughout. You just have to kind of pay attention to what's the lighter and what's the darker value One thing to remember when you're shading is, shade in the shape. Like, see how I'm kind of going in a curve here because right here this curves down, and you can use your value to help outline the form. You can show the form of this. It's a 3D image and it's got a curve here. And so if you sort of take your value and you curve it, it shows that that's also where it curves. Same here. You see this band here, it curves. If you shade it in the direction of that curve, you can demonstrate the form of this piece. I'm going to draw a stronger line here to show that this is separate. You can use your harsh lines to create areas of difference. Now I have this sort of rough sketch. Now I'm going to blend the colors. You can use your finger and blend it, but it honestly gets quite messy over time, and it's hard to do it precisely because your finger is not as detailed. But you could also take just a tissue. I've been using it for blending other stuff, you can see. And you take it and try to blend the colors and pay attention to what direction you go in with the blending too, to preserve those directions that you were doing for your form, not blend in areas that shouldn't have too much color. Sometimes when you do the value shading, you blur all the outside edges. So I like to go back and make sure they get defined again. So it's a little back and forth. I'm going to shade it. Now I'm going to blend this here a little more. There we go. So this is still the darkest part. This is not as dark as I'd like it to be anymore. So I'm going to darken that up a bit. And this is like an entry in a journal to show a specimen that you collected, just like Mary Anning did in her journals. There is a shadow. So a shadow is also a value. And on this, the shadow, it's really going to depend on how your light's going, but I'm going to do an outline of the shadow. It kind of mirrors this, and it kind of goes up, and then it points there. So there is your shadow. Now the shadow value is lighter than this, but darker than the inside of this. So you have to just work and see how dark you want it to be. The nice thing about a shadow is the edges do not have to be perfect. They can be very messy. Shadows are very blended, so do a really good job blending your shadow. Make it really fuzzy. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to go over the edges of my shell because I really want to make it clear where the edge of the shell ends and that shadow begins. Now, what I could do at this point is flip it over and do in a completely different perspective on the same shell. You see that? I could look at it from this direction or this direction, or even just like this, and it looks more like a typical snail shell. Here's another shell. It doesn't just have stripes. It's got different values of brown here. I'm going to make this one a little bigger over here. So once again, we start at the beginning of the shell and we just do a general shape of it. You don't have to do a shell. You could choose to do something from your house that you want to sketch. You could go in your backyard and choose something from nature or a park, a leaf. Pine cones are great. They have all sorts of interesting texture to try to show. And you notice new things about them as you sketch them. That's another thing that's really interesting. If you want to study something, a great way to learn about it is to do sketching of it. What am I going to color the darkest? First, I like to look for the darkest spot. What's the darkest spot on here? It's right down here. This is the darkest. I don't know. Really dark brown there. Okay, now that I've done that, I want to think about where the white spots are. So there's white here, white here. Those are the parts I don't really want to shade. So I'm going to protect those with kind of just lightly putting some color around them there to let me know that I don't want to shade those parts. There are the two different snail shells all finished. So this one is the ancient fossil, and this one is the modern day shell. Let's see if the snail has changed much over time. The species of snail might be different. This part looks like this big wide opening. There's 3 different holes here. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I really do think they're not that different.
Thanks for doing art with me and joining me at the beautiful Oregon coastline. I hope you enjoyed sketching some different shells, and I hope you'll try to go out to the beach and gather some shells of your own that you can spend some time sketching on your vacation and travels.